And we're live. What's up, Will?
Been a busy morning already.
Aren't
I've
they
been
all?
I've been up. I've been thinking about this web. Honestly, I've been thinking about this live. Like, so I couldn't sleep. Between that and the cloud code,
A little bit of
disastrous stuff you put me into. It's a rest. And the two kids, they're two. That's basically the recipe for not sleeping at this point.
that's a triple whammy. First Prescient live, but we've done one before, so it feels like full circle. Um,
Yeah, I half remember it.
half,
Remember, you,
yeah,
you came with a lot more energy than I did. That's probably like the usually the case, I think, with anything. But no, it's exciting to be on this side of the house with you, and also to chat more about this topic, which I think is incredibly relevant for
also I
the
think
audience that we're talking about.
it was supposed to be Mike, and then I think you dropped out last second, and then you were a trooper and jumped in the whole presentation, which is just a microcosm of your personality. You're just a can-do guy. Well, awesome. What are we going to be chatting about today? Maybe we can kind of do a little intro while people are pouring in.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, before that, like just introduction of who we are, maybe. I'm Will, VP of Strategy and Operations here at Prescient, AI, and I've been here for 2+ years, but I've been an operator previously to this. I was running e-commerce and kind of Amazon business for CPG brand called Recess, back when it was about 10 people, and grew it to a nice business. Learned a lot about how to grow businesses from there. I was an investor previously to that, so kind of took like, okay, there's a data-minded approach to actually how to run this business, and then decided to start a business after that, acquiring Shopify brands during kind of the heydays of Thrasio, backed by the same investors as Thrasio and the Amazon ecosystem, to do it in the Shopify ecosystem. Longer story, not worth this discussion, but I gave back investor money after 9 months. But the thesis statement was true, which was like, how do we use data to make better decisions, which led me kind of down to the path of the SaaS world, which is, okay, well, how do you activate? There's so much great data here. How do we make decisions? And fast forward to Prescient, I joined because it was one of those tough decisions around what we're going to talk about today a little bit. Of clearly, there's a lot of impact that you don't typically see as you're growing an omnichannel business, through these halo effects that we're going to mention as well. And the top brands I was talking to, the ones that are fastest growing, were saying, well, market mix modeling is kind of the way to go. We're seeing kind of other players crop up and supporting this. I talked to a lot of those players. I didn't really see anyone try to build like a SaaS solution that was as fast and dynamic, right, as what Prescient was building, which was pretty new at the time. Then was incredibly impressed by the team and joined, as one of the kind of the first team members as they were expanding the team even further. So, been excited to be here, and obviously excited to have you on. So, I'll pass the mic to you for a second, then we'll go into the topic of the day, what we're thinking about.
Yeah, for sure. It's always
Who
nice
are
to know like
you?
the lore behind everybody. Yeah, maybe while we're doing the introduction as well, if you're joining, in comments, leave where you're dialing in from, maybe a link to your brand, maybe a comment on what you're trying to learn today. We'll be like checking the comments periodically as we go to make sure we answer live. But yeah, I'm Elliot, head of growth at Prescient. I've been here coming up on like 2 proper months, and it's been awesome, right? So I came in at a business that has an incredible product, working with some of the largest players in the space and the largest advertisers and brands in consumer. And it's kind of like I was roped in because, similar to you, like the pitch was, at a certain point, the tools afforded to you just can't help you continue to grow, right? And like so much content online is about like how to go from like 0 to 1. So like all the like Twitter content, like how to like get to your first million and stuff, and all that's great. But that same all the strategies and approach is not going to work to get you towards like $100 million brand. And there comes a point where you're advertising and selling in all these channels, and your options are either just give up on the data and throw faith and hope it works. Or another extreme would be like, are you actually going to hire a bunch of data scientists and data engineers and build like the data infrastructure that you need? And like, it's kind of like a version of the buy build thing I see with AI all the time right now. Like, could you do that? Like, maybe, but it's like a massive distraction from what you should be focusing on as a brand, which is brand, product, marketing, and all these things that are your core competencies. So it's like, what gives? And a solution like Prescient and MMMs, generally are a huge unlock for brands that really want to get to that like next level of spend and find incremental customers and everything. So I'm really excited to dive into this today because I think TikTok generally and TikTok Shop specifically are sales channels, marketing channels that are like really, really important for these brands, especially reaching different types of customers or using content or influencers or creators or whatever. But you got to tie that back to sales, right? And at first glance, if you look at those, early stage brands when they're talking about like TikTok, they'd always be like, this isn't a conversion channel, or like people on TikTok have a lower AOV. And like that might be true if you're just looking at in-platform data. But something like an MMM could actually, flip your entire world upside down and be like, none of those actually are true. You're just not measuring how it's impacting the direct sales channels and marketplaces and retail and stuff like that.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. I mean, yeah, we'll get to the meat of it. I mean, back to your question earlier about like why are we even doing this? I mean, the biggest thing, when we build out like a new integration, new sales channel and anything is all about customer demand, about, well, what do we want to build next? So it probably happened, I don't know, about 6-7 months ago, maybe 8 months ago at this point, where a lot of brands that we work with were saying, TikTok Shop is growing dramatically, right, as just like its own channel itself. But we actually feel that there's an impact larger outside of TikTok Shop that is happening to our business, right? And that usually was in the form of we call it halo effects into places like Amazon. They're like, well, I'm generally feeling intuitively and seeing the numbers that I'm actually scaling TikTok Shop at the same time, and my Amazon business is scaling at the same time. So I think that's usually where a lot of this starts, which is like there's market intuition that is very strong. There clearly is data points like that would show that you don't need to have a fancy tool to tell you that your sales are going up, right, when you start spending somewhere and there's no other actions being taken. And they were starting to see data, in other places such as, their direct consumer businesses or even in retail. And so that was just like our aha moment. Okay, let's go really start building this out. But let's not just build it out in a way that is just let's go build out a model and give it to people. We have to be very thoughtful about it. How do the interactions work? So I think the important context setting as well is that, you could feed a model information, it could tell you something, right? Any model can tell you information back, right? It's all about the inputs you put in, the care you put in of, well, what are the direct influences, let's say in TikTok Shop, in this case, GMV Max, right? As a kind of the core ad type. What are other influences in TikTok Shop? So a big thing when I talked to a lot of brands in scoping this model out was, do you believe that other marketing platforms can influence your shop sales? So an example of that is, do you believe Meta, right? You see a Meta ad, or you see Google ad, or you see an Apple ad, right? Do you think that a user sees that ad and then was like, okay, I'm aware of it, and then they go to TikTok Shop and they convert at some point, right? That's a very important design decision, because if you believe as a brand that there's no influence, then you shouldn't have an impact, right? You shouldn't have halo effects into TikTok Shop. If you believe that there are influences, which is what we predominantly heard from a lot of brands, then there should be that interaction, right? And then the goal of our model, right, in the end is to disentangle the set of interactions and show you where does actually the true impact coming from, right? And also where is impact then being felt outside of the shop. So I think it's important context because, model design is so critical, and we don't just focus on data science, we focus on like the marketer intuition mixed with data science here. Okay, so now back to, let's talk about some of the data here overall. So I'm going to flip some slides over, just like set the stage of how to think about this channel generally, and then we'll kind of riff a little bit and talk more about like the actual underlying data, maybe look at some examples from some brands specifically. But I'm going to open up my screen. You tell me, Elliot, if you can see it, because I can't see anything. Okay, great. I can see something now. Maybe I can. Or I see you, Elliot. But
I see Jumbo
a Jumbo U. Okay, perfect. So now we're good. In general, so this chart, a little stylized view, but what it's essentially showing is that there's a combination of TikTok ad spend and GMV Max spend. Of course, GMV Max spend in this case is going to be dedicated towards basically driving TikTok Shop sales, from a general lens, if you will not look at it, as we would look at it, which we'll talk more about. And you'll see kind of the brand count, and this is a fixed data set of certain brands, but the brand count top side for TikTok ads hasn't really changed too much. It's consistent up and down in terms of the brand spend, so that are active in TikTok ads. But the actual amount of active brands on GMV Max, which is, again, related to shops, is increasing pretty substantially. The scale doesn't even do it justice, right, in what we're thinking about here. Then also the actual mix, right, of the spend, which is the gray bar or the actual max spend. You can see it's starting to dwarf the spend on TikTok ads as well. And we'll talk more about like why that's important, but basically we're just seeing a huge uptick, right, in spend on GMV Max. And it's because of usually not just shop sale packs outside of shop as well. All right, next slide for me. So one of the core things we'll talk about a little bit in our benchmarks and what we see is that it comes to thinking about how to measure and then optimize, your spend. A lot of it comes down to, well, there's going to be direct impacts of that spend. So in this case, for like, let's say GMV Max, there'll be a direct impact on your TikTok shop sales, but there's likely going to be halo effects, right, onto other sales channels like Amazon, your DTC business, or even retail, right, if you have the offline component. And the biggest thing that we see, in a lot of cases is that there's a lot of, undercrediting happening relative to what the channels would report, because usually it's such a narrow lens, right, into like a click or a pixel or anything else, versus maybe what Prescient can support, which is thinking about, well, if we're thinking more about the top of funnel, how to redistribute bottom funnel credit to top of funnel, how do we think about the extra halo effects of these sales channels? So when you see these green bars that are a lot higher than the gray bars, that really just means that there's likely additional things that we're capturing in our model that's probabilistically saying that these are channels that have strength, right? The one thing that is not in this is not scale. So scale is also important. Predictive capabilities, which we also can talk about in a little bit, also matter. So if you have a lower bar for Meta, for instance, as channel reported, it's pretty close to the channel reported actually, not because it's a bad channel, it's just because it's the most at scale channel, right, we typically see for most of the brands that we have. But GMV Max, TikTok ads do sit above, in terms of weight, and GMV Max in particular sits above in weight in a lot of this, MMM calculated ROAS values because of a lot of the reasons that we'll talk about coming up here. Probably one of the more interesting charts, like from a benchmarking standpoint, is thinking about, well, where does like the credit actually come from when we think about, why those ROAS values look higher, for instance. So for GMV Max, which is this top bar in this example, and this is again real data. This is from December's actually cohort. You'll see a lot of the value comes from TikTok Shop itself. Not surprising, and again, more to come on like what this data actually means. But there's also a ton of value, and also like one of the big reasons of this webinar is coming actually to Amazon, right? So this is not just the intuition. There's actually the data telling us that there is more of a statistical, relationship that we're seeing between people that are spending on GMV Max, and it is having an extra added effect on conversions into your Amazon store. And Amazon is in orange in this case, and there are other channels, of course, that have this, this impact as well, but it's at a much larger degree as a percentage or proportion for GMV Max. Then you'll see these other impacts like a direct or an organic and search. These are more the direct to consumer impacts. So we actually can model and understand, well, is there an increase in your search traffic or your direct traffic into your website? And it's usually unexplained, by even most tools. But we're going to say, no, it's likely given, credit from this GMV Max campaign or this other set of campaigns that we have. So what's really cool about this is it's all incremental, right? In a lot of ways, still the same spend, but we're seeing just that additional value that you typically have when it comes to thinking about, okay, how do we actually use these halo effects to think about channel investment and decisions? All right, I am definitely going to stop there because that was like kind of a whirlwind of charts and data, and I'm on my second caffeine kick already. So, Elliot, what do you think about that? Any questions you have after seeing these charts?
It's awesome. Also, I'm heavily caffeinated, so I have a lot of questions for you.
Nice.
So I'm going to play the role of like, I know quite a bit about MMMs, but also make sure for the audience that might have like a range or a scale here, like what is the opportunity / problem that they might be facing? So if I understand correctly, if you bring up that really cool chart that was showing MMM reported ROAS against like in-platform, like if I'm understanding correctly, like, this can be a massive issue because you could be turning campaigns, entire channels off that are providing a lot more incremental value to your business than you would otherwise think without an MMM. Is that like an accurate recap of like what the core problem is?
It's one of the core problems, right? So the core problem, as you had mentioned, like a lot of the current kind of ways that marketers think about their business, which is not necessarily wrong, is that what is trackable? What can a platform report, or what can another, maybe click-based tool report, right? And usually that lens is so narrow into maybe a direct-to-consumer experience. For most of the brands that we work with, right, they're omnichannel. They're thinking outside of that respective, just D2C business. They're on Amazon. Again, they're on offline. There could be in retailers, right? They're thinking about, well, how does that paid media impact extend outside of there? So to your exact point, if you just look at that narrow sales channel lens, then you're actually then thinking about it in terms of, well, how do I optimize towards that business? But I'm basically losing the ability to actually drive performance in, let's say, Amazon. So a perfect example of Amazon, if you were to think about it as like almost two distinct channels, ton of credit is usually given to Amazon ads, right? In its Amazon's ecosystem when they platform report. It's just like Google search in that sense, where basically Amazon ads is benefiting a lot from just the awareness-based, spend that you're doing, or the awareness that you're doing outside of spend, that people that are going to search on Amazon and they convert through, let's say, a sponsored product ad. And all of a sudden you're saying, well, yeah, it's as high on return or tacos or ROAS in this case, right? But is it really actually driving incremental demand? Not really, right, in a lot of cases. So that's where looking at a tool like this and looking at like tools that work well with understanding halo effects, because if GMV Max is truly driving that awareness, you probably want to scale GMV Max instead of scaling Amazon ads in that scenario.
Yeah, so, I kind of on part two. So I don't know if did you pick up Click, the book that just came out from the CMO of Facebook? I feel like his name should be more well known. Apologies to him, that's not coming to
I wish I had time to read any of that stuff, but I will have to work it into the next.
It's pretty good. I mean, he does kind of talk down a little bit on some different measurement stuff with opinions that I disagree with. But I think one thing that was like really important is like, before getting into the nitty gritty and like tracking and like the real like advertising nerd stuff, he does talk about like the guiding principles and like what's the real like goal and holy grail of doing all of this. And he hammers home that like incrementality is like the name of the game. And looking at the right side of this chart versus the left side, I feel like the left side are like the known ones. Everyone is on Meta. Basically $1 out of like 90 cents of every dollar that we have is going into Mark Zuckerberg's pocket if you're on an e-commerce brand. But like channels like Pinterest, Axon by AppLovin, Snapchat, stuff like that. Yes, their channel ROAS might be low, but like one of the reasons that you should be exploring these, to your point about awareness, is like that's kind of where incrementality might be lying for you, right? If you're, once again, we're talking about brands that are kind of breaking through that like 10, 20, 50, 100 million plus, right? At that scale, you start to saturate a little bit or strongly across like the OGs, right? So you're like Meta, if you're spending tens of millions of dollars, incrementality becomes like a harder and harder thing to achieve. Kind of walk me through like how an MMM helps you to achieve it, like incremental sales that you wouldn't otherwise be exposed to.
Yeah, and there's also some great questions in the comments, so we'll come back to those as well right after this. But I think you're like spot on, which is like, what do you actually believe is driving these sales, right, in the end, versus like what actually is the most. I think what Meta has done incredibly well, and give them a ton of credit for this, is that like they're the best at personalization and retargeting and targeting in general, and also they're really good at actually the click-based and trackable measurement, and incredibly good on D2C. So they actually deserve a lot of credit for that. And I don't want to take that away. It's just there is likely going to still be challenges. Let's say if you're on Snap, like they're not the best at tracking down funnel conversion, because that's not actually what they're designed to do. They're designed to actually generate awareness. And so if you think about that, just by nature of like the challenge of you're forcing Snap to be a direct response channel when really it's an awareness channel, then because of the way you're measuring it, then how do you really optimize that in a sense? Versus, Snap has like this awareness generation capability. It's part of the mix. Then maybe it doesn't scale as well, as like a Meta, but then it's about right sizing that scale. And that's also like what these tools do really well. So I think what this chart doesn't do well, like to be fair, is that this has nothing to do with scale. This has something to do with more like the state of the world it is today in terms of what channels we're reporting, what we report. But then what's also that important is about forecasting saturation points, understanding that can you reach a certain level of scale. I think what's super exciting about the GMV Max examples is that, and I know it's on the left side of the page a little bit, is that, right now, like I was looking at the average data set, like it's around 4% of spend, right, for the overall data set, right, of people that on TikTok shop of their overall mix, which is pretty good, right? That's actually like in line with like some of the top core channels they might spend on. But for the top spending brands on TikTok shop, it's their number one marketing channel, number one in spend, right? And those brands are usually omni-channel. They're not like the direct consumer only channels, but that just means that there's a ton of scale to be had, right? And these are brands that are, doing 100 million plus, right, in sales. So if that is the case, then that means there is a ton of incremental value you can have at different levels of scale, right, in different sales channels and different platforms. And we'll talk more about this. The reason why they're doing that is because they were pushing Amazon, they're pushing retail, right? Not because they're just pushing DTC as well. So yeah, I think in short, you got to find your scale by testing these other channels, and then obviously understanding, what are the right tools to actually validate that those tests actually had an impact across your business, just on one piece of the business. So I want to acknowledge also there's some points and questions in the chat. Evan mentioned TikTok, is pushing fulfill by TikTok, and because of losing sales to Amazon. Actually a great point. For those I think are very aware of the operators on here, right, or agencies, TikTok is now basically migrating customers over by March, to basically do a fulfill by TikTok option, right? You can't really fulfill by your own merchant. You can still use some like third parties, but I think the goal is actually interesting. I think you're right, in some sense, Evan, that, they are losing sales to Amazon. They want to keep the captive, sales process with TikTok. I also think that it's like a consumer experience, question, which is for a lot of people that I talk to, like it's more of like the reason why people convert on Amazon is like that trust factor that Amazon's there's reviews, there's, like more validation with Amazon. So that's like why you see those halo effects also onto Amazon. And I think it's like the 2-day guarantee, right? It's like everything that basically, Amazon is really known for, which is like fast, efficient, and validated. And I think you have to build that for TikTok, right? If you want to own that part of the funnel, you have to do that, or you have to work with partners, right, that can measure that effectively. But that's just not the reality for like most situations. So I actually do agree that that's probably why they're kind of making TikTok, like Filled by TikTok, such a big part of what they're doing. And it's also like why Meta didn't do that. Like Meta kind of closed that social commerce area for a bit because I don't think they want to become a fulfillment arm, right? They're just really good at retargeting and targeting and owning the personalization funnel. Cool. So I think there's another set of questions, Maddie. We're the first to both. I can't read all of that from there.
He mentions that they're just launching on TikTok Shop now with 5 SKUs approved, and they would like to connect because they're trying to find a TikTok agency, which we can probably connect to with one of our
great agencies. Yeah, we have great agencies that do TikTok Shop stuff. So yeah, if you ever need any referrals or references, let us know.
Mike, our founder, popped in to say that he's got the best agency in the game with you, so he can connect you with Maddie Schroll. So we'll hook you up after this call for sure.
Very cool. One other topic that I might lead a conversation to a question for you, Elliot, too, which is we hear a lot, which is like, how do you think about generally make these channel decisions in like usually dictated between finance and marketing, for instance, that, finance of course sets budgets, but there might be siloed budgets even across these different sales channels. So I think we often get a lot of questions about, well, how do you actually dictate budget across these channels? So yeah, I'm actually curious your lens, given like you've been an operator obviously in the past, and you are a current kind of marketing operator as well. How do you think about budgetary decisions, and we'll come into our customers as well, how you think about it?
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm a very like bottoms up, top down Excel person, which I think is like not good. And I'm unlearning that now using advanced models. I did not have these at my disposal when I built budgets in the past. I think the tension between marketing and finance is one of the most interesting ones, probably the most interesting tensions in like an e-commerce brand, especially one that's scaling. So let's say your goals are growth or efficiency. It feels like you're not set up for success for either of those, right? Because finance might look at numbers, and I'm not shit talking the finance side of the house. You can defend them, but like they might look at the numbers and they have very good rationales for like what they should do. But marketing has like these intuitions and gut feeling, which I feel like should be recognized and respected if you're a good marketeer and operator. And sometimes you want to take swings, and it's kind of difficult to do that with the traditional data sets that you're exposed to, right? It's how can you come out and tell me how much you should be spending on a new channel for an experiment without something like an MMM? My brain's kind of broken because now I've seen the light, but everything else is just like kind of fiction that you're putting together in Excel, right? You're guessing a number.
Yeah.
I guess we can start with some baseline numbers. We can create like a couple scenarios, like an optimistic, realistic, whatever, pessimistic. And I feel like this just sets us everyone up for failure and creates even further tension between those two departments. What I liked, and something you said really, really early on and inspired me to like kind of think of our MMM as this GPS for growth, is what marketing and finance want most of the time is actually the same goal. It's like that efficiency goal or the growth goal. More often than not, it's the growth one. They just don't have anything at their disposal to like settle those arguments. And something like an MMM really, really helps. And like I think the example I've given a few times that's resonated with people is like, let's say you want to do connected TV. So not click-based channel, you can't like purchase from it directly. I think some of these providers are coming up with interesting products so you can like click and stuff like that or send to your phone, but you can't purchase. And if you run it, like let's say a connected TV campaign with like a couple $100,000, I can see how finance would knock on marketing's door after a while and be like, can we cut this, right? But if you can't tie it back to how it's fueling other parts of the funnel, how can marketing convince you that you're not just lighting money on fire? So yeah, I don't really have a great answer to your question other than I definitely think the pain or caused by this tension is like a core problem for a scaling brand and why the finance and marketing team don't get along.
Yeah, I think it's like, I think you said, well, it's like a common GPS. Like, what is that common understanding and language you have across the different platforms? And I'm actually glad you said the CTV thing. I have some unstylized charts that marketing didn't sanction for me to use, but I'm gonna just show them anyway, just because I think they're interesting and were pulled, by our team, as well. So let me pull open actually this one. That's why I look at my other side of the screen, just because I have some of these things available. So for one, unstylized way, but just some other benchmark stuff. Like from a categorization standpoint, TikTok Shop right now, we are seeing kind of beauty, health and wellness, as kind of those top categories, more consumable, of categories in general, which maybe is not surprising, in a lot of ways, but we are seeing kind of an uptick of like accessories and kind of like one-time, even higher AOV items. I was actually on, I don't know if Jarell, from Tishy's on this webinar, but if you are, shout out to you, since we did a podcast yesterday. But he was mentioning that they're even creating new SKUs, potentially for TikTok Shop, and that's something that is different because like the consumer base typically has like a lower AOV, There is something different about the audience there, but there's a lot of benefit from the awareness you get, And it's actually interesting to like version some products, which I think is a really interesting strategy, and like that's what we did at Recess when I was there, as like Amazon versus DTC, like different pack sizes and everything else to differentiate strategy. So that's another thing I think it's interesting. I think the other part is interesting is kind of like the overall spend per median brand is increasing across the board, as well in TikTok Shop, which just generally means that there's more diversity, when it comes to like the brand advertising. Like not only the number of brands are advertising, but the amount of things that the amount of spend people are doing actually is increasing as well. So seeing efficiency. And why I wanted to show this chart, because you talked about CTV, is I thought this was pretty fascinating in that, this is actually the attribution credit into TikTok Shop. So a lot of TikTok Shop's credit actually is driven by GMV Max. This is the paid media impact, by the way. So GMV Max drives like 70 to 80% of the credit in paid media in TikTok Shop, which is incredibly strong and usually not something we typically see in most ecosystems, which is a good validation in general that it's like a pretty good, way to drive TikTok Shop sales. But then you also see things like in the purple, where streaming TV is actually, it got up to like 15% of the overall credit in TikTok Shop was coming from streaming TV. And to your point, Elliot, like why would you spend, money on streaming TV? It's because it's actually going to have an impact on other sales channels, right? Not just your direct to consumer sales channel, which is very hard to track and measure, but clearly on these like search driven, awareness driven channels as well, like TikTok Shop, we often see streaming TV has like a huge impact on offline as well. And again, if you don't capture that, right, then you likely will shut it off, right? Or say, hey, this is actually not the right thing to scale because it's just something that is traditionally just really hard to measure and optimize against. And then you start seeing a spattering of other things that are coming in influencing TikTok Shop. But it's cool to see that there's clearly an interaction between your marketing. It's not just like a one size fits all, hammer and nail that you have to drive sales in a certain sales channel with a certain marketing tactic. There's a variety of marketing tactics that actually can change the way you think about the business.
We have a couple of really good questions I would pull up, but I have one.
I'll pause then.
I have one that I really wanted to ask you. It's a little bit of a detour, and then we'll come back to GMV, but I think it's another tension that I feel needs to get unpacked. And this is the tension between like the digital e-commerce team and like the retail team, where it's like they live on these like two separate islands. And like that just doesn't make sense to me because let's say you are retail, and I've been in this position before. So like when we had the incubator at Unilever, one of the brands that we launched was a collaboration with a big box retailer that I won't name, and it like started in all of these stores, which is a terrible idea, by the way, because we immediately had to prove sell through on something that has no awareness. But because of that issue, like they were like, all right, well, we went to bat for you and put you in all these doors. Start, clearing the shelves, right? And like, that was a story for another time. But like, let's say you're a more developed brand and you're trying to drive retail sales. Like, it's very clear that most, like we covered this earlier, the buyer's journey is really complicated, and it's not like everyone only sees one channel and like clicks, and like there's a very clear click journey to purchase. There's probably a very complicated roundabout way. And because of that, like if you're trying to drive sales at Costco and Target and Walmart and all of that, like it probably pays to have something like an event so that not only can you close the divide between marketing and finance, but between digital and retail.
Yeah, you almost that was my next chart, so we could have used that, right, in general. But I think perfect example, like these are the high level effects, right? It's not, and this is from our platform and a real brand, but here's a perfect example. It's an omnichannel brand. They're on Shopify, TikTok Shop, Amazon, and CVS, right? In this case, the blue is CVS, and I just kind of highlighted GMV Max's impact in this case. You'll see about 10% of the value, right, and a big dollar value for like an overall brand, right, is actually incremental halo effects from paid media to driving your retail sales in CVS. And what's so unique about this, as you mentioned, is it is incremental in every way because we're not changing the spend. We're obviously optimizing towards spend to drive certain outcomes, but this is still, if you didn't measure this, you just look at maybe the small slice that is coming into, let's say you're like DTC or TikTok Shop in this brand. And I do think decisions are very different when it comes to that. And overall, basically, what I've seen is that it's not just like the highest ROAS, for instance, or lowest CAC that you can achieve. It's where do you actually focus on channel strategy. And so if you want to drive retail sales, for instance, like what are those respective tactics that can drive retail sales? So in this case, let's say TikTok GMV Max and streaming TV are probably better options to drive retail sales versus if you want D2C, it's probably Facebook, right, or Meta. It's not the other way around likely. And that's what we typically in a lot of these benchmarks and with customers. I would say the other interesting point, I just got off of another actually demo call with a brand that's heavy on retail. And they said another reason to have these halo effects and support is they actually show it to the retailers and the buyers. And they actually convince them like, this is why, we can drive velocity for you. Like we can do digital activation. So of course you can do end caps and you can do trade spend and things that are more traditional in retail, but nothing really beats, having paid social and all this paid distribution that has a ton of scale, usually increases velocity very quickly. You can have creators, right, that are of course posting on behalf and showing a lot of momentum on social. And I think that's an incredible amount of value too, is it's not just selling to your team, it's selling into the buyers that are the gatekeepers basically of retail distribution in a lot of ways.
And to jump over some comments here. So Hazel, hopefully you got to your meeting on time, and I'm answering this really late. But yes, we will send it out to everybody. There'll be a recap. We'll get it up online. Get some goodies over to you as well. And another question over here, that's a really interesting one from Jeff, is have you seen a decline in efficiency with TikTok ads since the ownership change?
Yeah, interesting question. We've more seen like the shift, I would say, in overall spend going into GMV Max campaigns that has only been increasing, I would say, in velocity, and also we're still seeing very stable returns there. I'd say TikTok ads, right? We've seen a little bit lower efficiency versus TikTok GMV Max. So more could be a question of like the strategy you have. I don't know if it's necessarily the algorithmic change or the ownership change necessarily resulting from that. But a lot of the value, again, we typically see is still very much like outside of what is typically captured by even like the direct measurement. And so I don't think we've seen like a really big decrease there from efficiency, but actually very interesting to monitor. And that's like why, you know, our model's updated every day. So we have the benefit of actually understanding, like, do these trends change, you know, in probably a quicker manner. And good thing maybe we could follow up on a report against, you know, in this next probably session.
Do we want to jump into product and kind of show you around platform a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I think the fun part about this is like we have ability to look at demo counts and scramble data. So this is all based on like real live data, but it's all scrambled namings. The campaign types are not going to be the same naming convention, but it should be a helpful window, right, to understand, you know, how to operationalize, you know, some of these insights. So yeah, I'm in Prescient right now, and I'm in a kind of our performance dashboard. It basically allows us to like kind of drill a little bit deeper into some of these key trends. But here's a great example: is a brand, right, that is very omnichannel in nature. So they have sales across, let's say, Amazon and TikTok Shop and Shopify, and they are spending at all, right? This is the last, let's say, 90 or 30 days, right, of spend. But TikTok, again, is number one, right, in spend. So I think that's super interesting, even just by like face value, is it's very traditionally, I think, for brands, they're spending 70, 80% of their overall spend in, let's say, Meta. That's not necessarily true for a lot of omnichannel brands, especially ones that are focused on more top of funnel as well. So you have, at least in our case, you know, there are reported ROAS and we have CAC as well. But you can see already, like, there are going to be stark differences on a channel. So it could very well be that Meta actually is very strong at driving halo effects, right? 4.6 of the value into Amazon, right? And creating awareness. But, you know, knowing this brand in general, they're very focused on growing TikTok Shop, and they're very focused, you know, on also growing their retail presence, which also isn't a capability or looked at retail, you know, in the same way. So if I look at all sales channels for this brand, this might not be the retail brand I'm thinking of actually, but I'll come back to the other one. When there's retail basically also associated with this, there will be basically incremental value, right, of those halo effects that come in as well. Also, what's really interesting when you think about these brands overall, I'll go back to kind of their e-commerce and digital, right? It's obviously not just about the results you get on kind of that channel level, which I do think is important to understand, but there clearly are going to be stark differences, right, when it comes to thinking about, well, what actual campaigns are driving these differences, right, in overall returns. So, you know, usually I think like a myth of MMMs, like in the past, and this is true for traditional MMMs, is that, hey, you can't really go down to a level deeper than like a channel or tactic level. Maybe data is too sparse. Maybe, you know, it's just computationally hard to do. All that is actually true, but, you know, that's why we kind of built this from the ground up to allow for us to actually get to this granular level. And you can already see from a returns perspective, you know, some of them like this is, again, naming convention aside, you know, can have a huge impact, right, in the overall, even TikTok Shop sales, but has a, you know, low impact, right, in some areas, in other areas. So you want to be able to pinpoint these differences in campaigns because they're clearly going to have some differences, right, in how you can scale them. And back to like the next stop, right, is think about forecasting, right, as well. So what I love about forecasting is that no two campaigns are the actual same in general. Thank you, Maddie. I see a comment out there. I think what's super unique about like Prescient in a lot of ways is that, you know, it's not just about, again, looking at the past, looking at the future, you know, of how you actually scale these campaigns. So, we have various different ways you can drop down and see your impact across these different sales channels. Let's just keep it on Shopify for now. You can see kind of, this is basically the relationship between your spend and some outcome. In this case, let's say revenue. And you can see the efficiency, differences. So you maybe want to optimize towards an efficient outcome. You go towards that top, layer, or you see that efficiency is changing over time. And the other thing that's unique, is if you're not seeing, let's say, data in one area of this curve, as you spend in those areas, they'll update and they'll change, right? You start seeing the efficiencies of your spend and how they over time and across these different channels. So I'd like to, again, back to the point around like, how do you actually action on this? You have to test, right? And see where the pinpoint scale are, and of course, scale back in the areas that you feel like are not providing us enough for you.
So this is one of the things that completely broke my brain when I started here around saturation plots, because I feel like the typical saturation diagram that any like performance marketer has seen and takes as like, gospel. This is saying that that's basically not true. Not only is it not true, it's like frequently untrue. Do you have a similar experience like when we rolled this out where you were like, wow, like I had no idea that there are situations where saturation curve can be a completely different shape than another campaign on the same channel?
Like I actually didn't come in with like even expectations in a way, which probably is a good thing. And it actually met my intuition though, like especially when I was an operator, which was there clearly is going to be different levels of efficiency at different levels of scale, right? And also that doesn't mean that also if you continue to scale, efficiency is going to drop, because like there's learning periods, there's testing, there's creative underlying these campaigns as well. And so that's what I think is really important. That met my intuition, which is it's not just like a flat line that decreases over time, right? But it did break my brain to know about, well, how do you actually understand this across your channels? Right, and then that the efficiency could be different across those channels. So yes, you could be saturating on a campaign if you're just looking at DTC, but maybe it's actually increasing, right, in efficiency on Amazon. And like that is intuitively hard to figure out and to understand, because then you're all of a sudden saying, well, how do I actually think about that and optimize towards it? Because that is a different way to think about the business, right? Is that, yes, it's like very direct consumer focused, but it's actually driving these halo effects, right? Which need to be taken into consideration. And then also what broke my brain a little bit is, well, these curves could change, right? I've seen these curves change because there's like these immense amount of data points on the left side maybe, but the whole point of here is like take swings to scale your spend. And so what if all of a sudden you scale your spend, 3-4x, and that curve suddenly changes and goes upwards a little bit? Then it's like, okay, wow, this is so different. There is more scale to be had. And my fundamental belief is I think in a lot of these channels especially, and campaigns, people are not spending enough money, right? They're underscaled. And then they're oversaturated, right, on areas that are more bottom funnel, mid funnel tactics.
First of all, very rare the finance guy says you're underspending, go rip. That's awesome. I would love to be on the other end of that so I can let my hair down and just rip. I am. Which is also actually another thing that I grokked in what you were saying that I saw myself, but I also kind of like, I imagine a lot of the people connecting to this want to know is like, what is the action there, right? So it's clear that the data is very powerful and then we can see these relationships that we wouldn't otherwise see. But what about like the rituals, day to day, week to week, month to month? Like what does this enable for the performance marketing leader or the head of growth or the head of finance who might be on this call? Like how do they take this and take swings?
Yeah, I mean, the most important thing is like, it's a great question. First off, it's about risk tolerance. Like how much are you willing to take the swing, right? If you don't take a swing, or if you don't like want to actually move your budget, whether it's like reallocating budget or scaling your budget, then you're not going to feel the impact, right, in the end. So that's the most important thing, is that you have to be willing to like appreciate that this is a different point of view. It will look different maybe than other forms of measurement, right, and how you optimize your business. And you have to have trust that it actually will move your business, right, when you make that change. I think another thing to take into consideration is like you have to understand like the time frame of how you deploy this test, because if you have a product that has a 30-day consideration cycle, you should consider that, right, for actually as you're testing it. And the benefit also here is like, again, halo effects are about like they're time aware, they're time decayed, meaning you spend today, right, you're going to feel that impact over time. And so that's what is also captured is you want to understand, like you need enough time for halo effects to mature as well and operationalize that. And also to just start in like 1 or 2 channels, right? Don't have to like take everything and reallocate everything and make sure you're optimizing everything. So, we have a cool optimization tool that will help to do that for you, help to plan budgets and scenarios, right? Where you can start scaling your spend, right? And taking some of those swings, which we don't have to go into too much detail, but the benefit of these is, you can obviously look for improvements to your ROAS or whatever target is, increase your revenue, and we'll give you specific campaigns, right, to actually optimize against, to scale or to scale back on. And that's all based on that fundamental belief of these saturation, right, curves, using historical data, using other things to help you figure out, well, how do we use this data to action on it and then start testing and then track against it? Because that's also you need to do. You need to track it, right, and understand, are you hitting that target or not? And get more data, get more learning, get more experience, meet the intuition, right? And then showcase that, okay, this actually did work to change my business. And I think the most important thing I'll end off this little soliloquy with is tie it back to like your actual business health and metrics. So if you know that your blended cost, your blended returns are really important, don't just focus on like modeled metrics, focus on your actual business performance after you actually have run these tests.
And then with TikTok Shop, like as I've known it, end of one, my experience is just someone scrolling, not looking at data. Like a lot of TikTok Shop products are like lower ACV, appealing. It's kind of a cliche at this point to say that it's like a younger platform, because I think it's matured to the point where there's people across the whole spectrum, especially on the buying side, is probably people who are older. But do we find that, I'm not going to name names, so we work with some like interesting advertisers that have like very considered purchases, things that might take you years. I definitely have heard a couple of these brands on podcasts and connected TV, and it's like, if I would purchase, I've been quote unquote in this funnel for a long time.
Yeah.
So like the 2-part question would be, one is, do MMMs specifically work for products that are like lower ACV, higher ACVs, they're like a sweet point. And part 2 is like with TikTok, taking a swing into TikTok Shop specifically. If there's a brand on the sidelines watching this right now and they're like, I would love the confidence to do that, would it work for my brand, right? Would it work if for something that's very expensive? Is it better for something that's lower? Is the midpoint like a sweet spot?
Yeah. So 2-part question, right? So I think the first part, which is like long consideration cycle, potentially like being aware for a while. I think what's really important, like, and I think what honestly marketing mix models can do, right? And there's no perfect solution, is that you also all have to model like the understanding of the ecosystem, such as like your organic growth, your trend, your seasonality of your business, right? So those are actual elements that are in your model, right? They're trying to explain, hey, is this like a usual thing that happens in your business, or is this a difference, right, of something happening? So actually, I believe like, marketing is cumulative, right? I think we all do in a lot of ways. So either it's going to impact like the trend of your business and organically increase your business, or you're going to see it be more effective with marketing as well. So it's not just about decomposing your sales into like how much comes from the season, how much comes from this. It's about how's my marketing effectiveness change in that seasonal period, which is like, again, what a smart model can do. So to answer then that question, it's also about time decay and ad stock and other things that are considered. So like in a marketing model like Prescient, we actually use the data to understand and inform, well, what is the time decay for each individual tactic that you have? So GMV Max as a tactic will not have a different time decay element than Google search might have. And all that just means is like the consideration window from probably where you might purchase with Google search is probably, 2, 5 days, whatever it is, versus GMV Max could be 30, days in general. And that matters because that will help you then understand, well, how do you then redistribute credit, right? To what is considered more top of funnel, maybe awareness driving versus bottom funnel, and harvesting, right, that demand. And so, yes, like that's why we work with a lot of high AOV brands, right? Because they like to have that top of funnel to bottom funnel dynamic and understand like the relationship between the two, which is what we also show, which is like how much does GMV Max drive branded search conversions? We show that, right? Which is, I think, really cool. Now coming to the other side, like low AOV brands, the cool part about the product, right, is it's dynamic in the same way. So you can actually get very live time feedback and it just shortens the cycle. So if you know your consideration cycle is 7 days to 14 days, the feedback loop just gets faster and faster, right? Because you're iterating, you're testing, you're trying new things, and the model's updating every day for e-commerce and weekly for your offline business. And so you just get more dynamic feedback. So it works with any type of brand, which I think is really great, as long as it's meeting the criteria of like omni-channel, has multiple sales marketing channels, not just like direct response focus, which maybe a different tool can be used for. So now I'm like totally blanking on the second question or the second part, but maybe I'll repeat that.
It was if
second
a
piece.
brand is on the call and they're like, okay,
yeah,
I want to get set up with an MMM. Like, what is the next step? What is something they have to consider if they were to take this?
Yeah, for TikTok Shop, I think especially, why do we do benchmarks? Like, I think benchmarks are really helpful just to understand like what other best-in-class brands do, right? And that's what we typically work with. Like, we're very lucky to work with a lot of best-in-class brands, and they're finding scale, right, in TikTok Shop as its own native sales channel, but also finding opportunity to use and leverage like the scale in Shop and GMV Max to push their other sales channels. And there's not so many at scale channels that you can actually push spend into and see a return, right? But again, you need a tool like Prescient, right, to be able to do that, because you need to validate the returns actually are there to justify the investment, right? Both to your team internally, but also finance, anyone else. So that's why they go hand in hand. Is like I highly suggest, right, if you have an opportunity to start maybe testing in Shop and anything else, like why not? Like, it's a new sales channel and also has these halo effects that have been proven out, right, from a lot of these brands. And especially as you saw, like in the one example, and it's true of many examples, like truly GMV Max is the top spending ad channel for a reason, right? It's not just because it's a flash in the pan, it's because it actually had real business impact for them as well.
That's crazy. It feels like my LinkedIn content isn't easy right next week, because I had no idea about that data point. I feel like most people probably aren't aware of that. That was definitely news to me. And like at first when you said it, I was like, I'm mishearing something. Is there like a caveat to this? But I guess it does make sense. If you're our customer base and our data set is like brands that are at scale, and if they're written pursue that incrementality, like at some point, like I guess the shift goes away from being like you're a one-stop, one trick pony with Meta. Not, once again, not bad talking them. I think they're a critical part of the growth. But incrementality might be coming from somewhere else. So to talk our book a little bit, if someone wants to get set up, what's the Will Suite deal? We can give them. Should they reach out to you directly? Should they scan this QR code? What's the best way for them to get set up and try it out?
Yeah, as Ali mentioned, I am kind of the finance person also at the company. So, bills, right? We'll talk about it. No, I definitely love to, we want to get people invested, right, in like this methodology using GPS. So like, I think that the good part is like we're efficient, we're affordable. We want to make sure that you're testing if you're the right fit. So yeah, definitely scan the QR code, mention my name, and say like, hey, Will told me maybe I can get a deal. I won't tell you what that deal is, quite yet. But if you're nice enough, right, I'll jump on the line and kind of put my stamp on it. But no, I think again, like back to like what's the most exciting, I think like education is like the biggest hurdle right now for adoption for a lot of these tools. And a lot of it comes down to feedback from like great operators, right? And how to use these tools, because the tool is only as good as you can operationalize it. Like, it doesn't matter how much data you throw at it or we throw at you, right? As long as you start testing and actually validating against it, that's what matters in the end.
Yeah, I think one of the privileges that we have with working with some of the largest brands in the world is we work with some of the smartest operators in the world, and they're vocal and we love it. They tell us what they want. They tell us what they need to fix. They tell us new features. They're not shy about that. And I think that really gets shown in the product and how quickly it's like changing. The velocity is like nuts. Like you said, how long ago did you even have the idea for TikTok Shop versus when it like launched and we're utilizing it in platform?
I mean, I would say like the design process is important. Like, we don't want to just launch something right tomorrow, right? In a lot of ways, when it's something as important as this. So we put a lot of it into like the research and design first, but the implementation after that is easy. Like, if you want to sign up for Prescient and TikTok Shop, you just plug into our API and you're there. Like, your model's live in 48 hours typically. So, or in less than 2 weeks, right? If you have like offline and other things associated with that. So the benefit, I think, for what we're trying to do is like, we want to make it accessible and easy. I think if anyone has used a marketing mix model in the past or heard about them, they usually run once a year, twice a year, like, once a month if you're lucky. And a lot of times it's because they weren't set up infrastructurally to actually support, both scale and speed. And that's what we're trying to do here is we want to make sure that there's scale, speed, and accuracy, the best math, right, associated with making decisions. Something like TikTok Shop right now is turnkey, right? You don't have to really do anything. You just have to sign up, right, and start using it and leveraging insights.
Yeah, I mean, well, this is incredible. We have a couple of things we want to promote here now for events if people want to get some face-to-face time with us as well. So the first one is if you're headed out to e-tail West in sunny Palm Springs, which would be lovely because I'm in the winter wonderland currently in the moment in New York and it's freezing. We're going to be hosting a dinner with our friends at Cart, a couple other really cool agencies. If you want to come out, we would love to have you. You can scan here to get on the list. And the other one is a big one. If you are planning to go to the World Series of e-commerce in also sunny Las Vegas, if you're going to be out in Vegas in March for Shop Talk, we are hosting a Commerce Cup, which is our annual golf outing. We're hosting it with Proxima, the team over at Apple and Axon. We would love to have you. So if you scan this, you can get the RSVP list. It's a full day on the golf resort. You get luxury transport there and back. We'll have food, equipment. You just have to show up and have a great time. It's the day before Shop Talk kicks off. It's a great way to meet a bunch of other operators exclusively. We're approving like the top of the top. So leadership, marketing leaders, C-suite founders. So you get to kind of rub shoulders with other people who are experiencing all the same problems as you, and also get to socialize when you're not, in a casino, right? So yeah, scan this. We'd love to have you. And then any parting notes from you, Will? Advice, wisdom?
My wisdom is go out and golf if you can, before you have kids, or if you have kids, use this work trip, because I haven't touched my clubs in a year and a half, plus. So that's my parting wisdom is like, enjoy it, enjoy these great events. No, honestly, it's I think it's fun. Like, I think this is a fun job for the reason of being able to like look at a lot of different how they operate. So if you have any questions, anyone wants to follow up very specifically about, like, it doesn't even have to be about Prescient, right? It doesn't matter. We're always here to chat, right, about like how we think about just performance and optimizing your marketing mix.
Yeah, we're tagged in the post, so you can always click that, connect with us if you haven't already. And I'm sure we would love to hear from you if you want to spam our inbox with DMs. But other than that, that was the GMV Max presentation for today. Thanks everybody for showing up. Thank you, Will, for everything. Thanks to our data and insights team for pulling a bunch of insights, and our marketing manager, Brianna, for putting this together. And we will be hot on the scene with these basically every week, every other week. So we'll see you at the next one.
Great. Yeah. Thanks, Elliot, for facilitating. And also, yeah, shout out to our great marketing team who pulled in all these insights as well.
Awesome. We'll see you, everybody.